Personally, it wasn't that bad for me because I like being at home. But I've had to catch up on my art account, which I have told you about earlier. And I'm finally getting more active with it. And I'm also gaining more followers, which I'm really happy about. And so I'm just, painting a lot, trying to create more art so I can sell them and get on with the business.
But generally, do you think now when you sort of observe the smallest of things such as news around you, or even when you want to have a discussion on art, do you feel that debating has somehow sort of changed the way you thought about things before?
Sir, definitely. Like when I watch the news and stuff, I can just analyze it. I can organize like what I'm watching. I'm like, this makes so much more sense than it would have earlier on. And I'm like, even though I haven't taken debates like for a long time, I can already tell the difference. Like, I can just understand it better. And even like when I'm discussing it with my family, even they're like, you have a better understanding of it now, which is a like pretty good response. So yeah. I can definitely understand it better, and I can like, when I do research and stuff, I'm like, yeah, this makes more sense than it would before.
But I also want to know, why do you think like earlier, I'm sure even you know that the like girls in particular when it came, earlier. So like I think till 2016 or so, or till 2016, Ravi Campus had a debate team which had 4 girls and 1 boy. And that's the team that reached the semis of the Nationals as well in their final year. So that was a pretty solid team. Like 4 girls in particular, 3 girls speaking constantly. They spoke for almost, I think, 5 years for Ravi Campus. They were also the finalists of the Junior Nationals. They were a pretty solid team. But then there was like a gap for 2-3 years in particular. Even when I started coaching, I always had a concern that we need to have girls in the camp as well, because the team in the past has always been about having better speakers from the girls section. So I think that was a concern for me in particular when that happened. But I'm really glad. I always knew that that the competition is just equally good when it came, either it's coming from the boys section or the girls section. So yeah, I'm not going to sort of further take much time. I think I've killed the boredom one way or the other. Atiya has joined us. I think all of us have met her before. Sofyan, hi, hello, how are you?
Hi, Raza, how are you?
I'm good. Sofyan is here. I'm just going to give the mic to Sofyan. But before I do, he's a very humble person. So he's not going to say much about himself, but he's like a debating god in Pakistan, all right? So like, there's not been like a student who's been exemplary in debates and has not been coached by Sofyan. There's when you go to the worlds, everybody knows him, and he's pretty much like the face of Pakistani debating. I work with him in the DSP as well, in my years with the DSP, and it's been an honest pleasure to be around him. He's just Sofyan, and
okay, I think Raza's time is up.
So I'm going to pass this on to you. These are the kids that we have to Sofyan. The floor is all yours now.
Okay, sure. Hi everyone. Sorry, all of us are in pretty casual kind of setups here. I'm one of those people who hasn't really set up a home office, because I've been going to my actual office on an almost daily basis. In fact, post iftar, whenever I have Zoom calls, I also usually go to the office. This is probably the first time or maybe the second time I'm having a Zoom call from home. So I apologize for the noisy air conditioner and the overhead lighting. So with all of you just wanted to get my bearings a little bit. Are all of you from the same city school branch? Yeah, you guys can nod. I think that's helpful. If you guys remain on mute most of the time, but nod. So you're all from the same city school branch, yes? That's true?
Most of them are, yeah. Most of them.
Yeah, okay. And there's no boys branch or girls branch, it's a co-ed school, right? Okay. And how many of you guys are from 8th grade? Who here is from 8th grade? You can raise your hand. Anyone from 8th grade? One person from 8th grade? Danyal, right? And who here is from 9th grade? Okay, there are a couple of people from 9th grade. Who here is from 10th grade? One person from 10th grade. Anyone from 11th grade? 03, I think that's what you guys call it. Oh, okay. And who is here is from their in their A levels? Okay, all right. So this is a mix of students. And how many of you have debated before? Okay, how many of you have competed at DSP tournaments before? Okay, I mean, if you're in 8th grade and you've competed at DSP tournaments, there's something quite wrong going on. So I hope that is actually not the case. Okay, so the purpose of today's conversation is just to kind of introduce the kind of like the methodologies of approaching public policy issues from the perspective of parliamentary debate. Or maybe it'd be better put as applying the kind of techniques or methodologies of parliamentary debate to discourse around public policy or matters of public policy. So, I mean, I'm going to ask specific people questions just so we can make this as interactive as possible. It's very difficult with Zoom. But what is the biggest debate going on globally today? I'll ask, just because she happens to be in the middle of my screen at the top, Roma Shahzad, what's the biggest debate going on today globally?
Coronavirus is affecting us economically.
Sorry?
How coronavirus is affecting us economically.
How coronavirus is affecting us economically. Okay. Anybody else? I agree that that is definitely a big part of it. Does anyone else want to kind of like weigh in on that? Muhammad Hashir?
Whether a lockdown should be held or not, whether strict lockdowns should be held around the world or not. Yeah, that's a big part of it. That is definitely a big part of it. I think that is probably a good way of kind of encapsulating or expressing the biggest public policy debate in almost every country around the world. To what extent should we be locked down? And should we be locked down at all? To what extent should we be locked down? When should we raise the lockdown? So the debate or discourse around the lockdown is really, the primary one globally, okay? And in Pakistan, can someone give me a little bit more maybe texture to this? In Pakistan, how is this debate taking place? Or what are the major positions that public officials and media personalities or the media seem to have about this? Naima Javad, is that your name?
Yeah. Well, like there are like the way like it's not working properly. Like they shouldn't have like if I talk about the lockdown, the way they moved the lockdown, like they shouldn't have done it like without any measurements taken. Because if we see like people are rushing to the stores and like the cases are getting more.
Okay. No, but so can you tell me what the two sides of the debate are in Pakistan? Tell me a little bit about who is on each side and tell me a little bit about what they're saying. So can I ask Hira Nafis for her opinion? Hira Nafis?
So Hira actually our marketing team member who's here for screening you live right now on our social media page.
Oh, okay, fine. Okay, I'm sorry. Hira is not a student.
You don't bite the hand that feeds you.
Yeah. Okay, she's responsible for putting this together. Hi, Hira. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. What about? So I was trying to call on one of the people who isn't actually on video call. Amara, is Amara somebody who is a student or?
Yeah, she is.
Is she also
Yeah.
part of the team? Okay. Amara. So Amara, can you tell me a little bit about, or tell us a little bit about the debate and the way it's being conducted in Pakistan? I don't know if she's there. Bilal Arshad, I can see you. Yeah.
Yeah. So the debate that is happening in the grid status quo is that should the lockdown be finished during the Eid or not?
Okay, and what are people saying? What are the different sides saying?
Some people are saying that it is not justified because this will only increase the cases of coronavirus. But some people are saying that many people are suffering because of coronavirus, and they do not have the resources to spend the Eid in a suitable manner. So they should be allowed to open the malls for a specific period of time. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Does anyone want to add to that? Who are on the different sides of the debate? Azad Rayan. Azad Rayan.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So who are the participants in this debate? Who's on each side? First, you should tell me what is the debate, and then tell me who's on each side of the debate.
I guess there is a clash between the provincial and the federal government, and they're not reaching one particular conclusion, which has led to more drifts between them. And I think that it contributes to more problems rather than finding one particular solution.
Okay. All right. So, does anyone else want to add to this? Noor Iman, do you have a perspective on the lockdown? What is the status of the lockdown right now in Lahore? I'm in Karachi. Things may be slightly different.
Yeah, in Karachi, they're following a strict lockdown, but Lahore, because it's under the central government also has formed the provincial government in Punjab. So in Lahore, the lockdown is not that strict, but the two sides of the debate is like same is very stern on their decision of running same on a lockdown and a strict lockdown. However, in Punjab, they have opened the shops, although the time that they have decided is not what what normally the timings have slightly changed. Like the shops are open for lesser time.
Okay.
But since they think that coronavirus has affected people economically, and because of this, people are in an economic crisis. Therefore, they decided to let them they open these shops basically for that because of the economic crisis.
Right. Okay. So tell me, first of all, how many of you think that how many of you think that shopping malls should be opened? You can raise your hands. None of you think that shopping malls should be opened. Okay. Why not? Oh, Azad does. Or Abdullah does. Or both of you do. Okay. So first, why don't Abdullah, would you like to tell us why you think shopping malls should be opened? There's no right or wrong answer, clearly, right? But or there might be, but we don't know what it is. So yeah, did you raise your hand?
I raised my hand on the second question, which was fine. Why don't you think? So I thought that I would be able to answer you.
Okay.
So do I have the floor?
No, just a moment. Does anyone think that if anyone thinks that shopping malls should be open, could you just start speaking? Nobody thinks the shopping mall should be open.
I think they should be open.
Sorry?
I actually think shopping malls should be opened.
Okay. How come?
Because I think that that's the only way to keep the economy flowing, and that's the only option that can actually help our country right now, because because regardless of the fact that shopping malls are opened or not, people are not going to stay inside, considering the fact that Eid is also coming. So you really have to look at that. What are the benefits you're getting from opening shopping malls, and are the casualties related to coronavirus exclusive to opening shopping malls?
Right. Okay. Those are good points. So why were shopping malls are reopened? Because of Supreme Court orders, right? What was their reasoning? Has anyone read the judgment by any chance?
Raza should perhaps be on it.
Yeah. But no, but okay, so let's actually take a step back. Let's go back to January. Okay. How many of you could imagine that we'd be sitting here in May? Or how many of you thought when you first heard of coronavirus? When did you first hear of coronavirus anyway? January, December, early February? Did any of you think that it would be possible for us to be sitting here in May on a Zoom call and talking about coronavirus as if this is the only thing that's happening in the entire world, and an event or a phenomena that has affected all of our lives? All of us are connected on Zoom by one thing, which is Corona. And we wouldn't be on Zoom speaking to each other here today if it wasn't for Corona. And we're all, in a sense, touched by the same global event, albeit in different ways. This may never have happened before. But how many of you, when you first heard of this, thought that this would affect you personally in your own personal life? No one. Okay. Abdullah, Zulfikar, yes. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
So it's actually started with a meme actually. So I saw it somewhere and then I suddenly started looking up coronavirus, and then I found out that it is something contagious and it is spreading all around the world. So yeah. It was in mid-January when I looked up coronavirus and everything about it. And
did you think that it would affect Pakistan?
I sure did, because it originated in China. So my very first concern was the people working in Gilgit with these Chinese businessmen and the construction engineers. So
right. That's what you thought. Did anyone else think that coronavirus would affect them or affect us here in Pakistan? Roma thought so. In fact, I think that Anha hasn't spoken, so Anha can tell us what she thought.
So I first heard about the coronavirus towards the end of December, and since it was in China and China was like it was getting pretty bad, but I had a feeling that they would contain it pretty well. But at the same time, I searched it up online, and also there's a documentary I watched on pandemics, and it didn't seem too far fetched. Like I was like, this seems really realistic, and I discussed it with my siblings, and because my sister, she's a medical student, so she knows about these things. So right. I discussed it with her. We thought that it wasn't too far fetched. And I definitely saw this. I didn't think it was going to be this bad, but I definitely knew that it was going to spread around the world and it was going to become a global issue.
Right. Did you think that you wouldn't be going to school for 2 months or 3 months because of it?
To be completely honest, no, I didn't think that it was good. I thought that even if it does become an issue, it'll probably be only in the in the village areas, in the rural areas, and that it probably won't be a big issue to these
okay.
More metropolitan.
Well, you see, this is the interesting thing, right? That I asked that question because, like many of us, a lot of, public policy makers or public officials, many of them had never contemplated the possibility of a global pandemic striking, not just someplace far away, because someone in China ate something that they shouldn't have, but striking them so close to home. So events moved very, very rapidly. And once events began to move, there were different challenges when it came to taking decisions, which were life and death decisions. And when we elect public officials, we elect them to take decisions that do affect our lives in many different ways, right? They make decisions about schooling. They make decisions about healthcare. They make decisions about sanitation. They make decisions about war and foreign policy. So we are electing them to contribute to decision-making which is collective, or to lead decision-making on behalf of the community. And so then they were faced with a rapidly evolving situation in which they had to make decisions. And they had to make decisions on the basis of something, right? So the first thing is that the first question that somebody asks when they're trying to make a decision is the information reliable or not reliable? Am I actually getting the correct factual inputs? Okay. Now, in a parliamentary debate, we kind of abstract that out to some extent, right? We try not to debate things in which the fundamental underlying matters of fact are deeply contested. Okay. So we'll put that aside for a moment, and we will try and talk about the response to coronavirus without kind of getting into the very difficult questions about the facts about the disease, right? But we should revisit this question of what is true and what is not true. Public policy is usually made on the basis of two ideas, right? Or should be made on the basis of two philosophical approaches, okay? One is a fundamental rights-based approach, okay? This is something that you can write down. So are you giving people what they have the right to have, right? A right is a kind of an entitlement, okay? Something that you're entitled to by virtue of being a human being or being part of the human family. So you have a right to certain things as a result, okay? So you have a right not to be deprived of your life or liberty if you are without due process of law, if you want to add that, just by virtue of being a human being. You have a right not to be tortured just by virtue of being a human being. You have perhaps a right not to go hungry by virtue of being a human being, right? Then there's another set of concerns. So this is basically, when you talk about a human rights-based approach to policymaking, you don't take into account the consequences of policy. You take into account only the entitlements of people involved, only what somebody is entitled to on the basis of their humanity, not about consequences. Okay? So if in order to save 5 people's lives, and they have a right to live, if you have to affect the businesses of 10 other people, you should be able to go ahead and do that if you're looking at a rights-based approach. However, very few decisions are made only on the basis of these kind of fundamental rights calculations, okay? They're not even calculations, these ideas about fundamental rights. Most policies are made by using a blend of reasoning. One is questions of fundamental rights or human rights, and the other is questions of consequences. When you might have heard this debate term thrown around, utilitarian calculus, okay? This is basically this is a consequentialist reasoning, which means that you're trying to make a decision which leads to the best consequences. Okay, so here are 2 different ways of approaching the same problem. Freedom of speech. One way of arguing for freedom of speech is to say that people have an inherent right to be able to express themselves. That's something that is inalienable. You cannot take it away from them. It's absolute. You cannot deny them their right to speak. The other consequentialist reasoning, or the other way of arguing for freedom of speech on the basis of consequences, is to say that if you stifle the freedom of speech, you're not going to have a productive marketplace of ideas, and scientific progress, political progress is going to stall. And so you're not going to get the best outcomes as a result. These are 2 different ways of approaching the same question, but of course, they can also pull in different directions. 2 days ago, for instance, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but Twitter was blocked in Pakistan for a brief period of time. How many of you are familiar with this? Okay, Anand, tell me why it was blocked. or why supposedly why it was blocked?
I'm actually not sure. I haven't done too much reading up on this. I just heard it online.
Okay. So again, so sticking to uncontested facts, Twitter was blocked by by the government of Pakistan or elements of the Pakistani state. Why it was blocked, there are different theories, but it was blocked. Okay. One would imagine that they blocked it on basis of consequentialist reasoning. That having Twitter or allowing Twitter to run that night would have caused harm to Pakistani citizens or to Pakistan as an idea or a concept or an ideology. And so they blocked it temporarily. Of course, it was still accessible by a VPN in any case. But on the other side, people would say that no matter what happens, you cannot block Twitter. You cannot deny people the right to express themselves on social media or on any other platform. Okay? I'll give you another example. And these are decisions that are made by social media companies themselves. Very often, there will be stuff that is taken down from Facebook by Facebook, right? There is stuff that they have a set of community standards essentially, right? And they decide that certain types of speech do not belong on the platform. What kinds of speech do they remove from the platform? Do you guys have any ideas?
Hate speech.
Hate speech is one. Ishwaq, right?
Anything that could be offensive to a certain community.
Okay. Okay. Anything else?
Abusive or racist comments.
Abusive or racist comments. Okay. Anything else?
If there's any activity or any post that has something to do with terrorism, that's taken down.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. You cannot recruit terrorists on the platform, and you cannot support terrorist groups on the platform. Okay. So all of these are exceptions to free speech, right? Okay. And Facebook is policing it themselves. So now it's a very interesting question as to whether Facebook should be allowed to police even their own platform. But the truth is that while acknowledging the absolute right to freedom of speech, there are certain exceptions. A government may impose certain exceptions based on their ideology. A social media company may impose other exceptions based on other considerations. Okay? So, and there's always therefore, a contest or a struggle between these ideas about absolute rights and calculations of consequences. And you have to be able to add both things up in order to make public policy decisions. Okay? Now, for instance, the way in which the coronavirus debate in the United States has been framed. In fact, I'm just starting with the United States because I think it makes it a little bit easier. How can the government tell people to close their businesses? What right does the government have to tell people to close their businesses? What right does the government have to tell people to stay at home? What right does the government have to tell people to queue outside the supermarket? How does the government have these rights? Any idea? So if people have decided that it does not matter, that some will die, because it's my freedom after all, how does the government have the right to tell them to do something different?
When people elect governments, they acknowledge the fact that they are electing a government that they believe is better equipped to make certain decisions. So, for example, when people elect a legislative government, they acknowledge the fact that a government is better equipped to make those legislative decisions. That gives the government right to make certain decisions that it believes are in the best interest of the people.
Okay. All right. But the question is that, so there are two or three very important questions that you brought up. One is actually the contradiction that's at the heart of democratic theory, which is that do you elect governments to reflect your views or to impose their views? So do you elect, let me put it in a different way, a better way. Do you elect an official to exercise his own judgment or to exercise your judgment as your proxy? Okay, this is a very interesting question. This was explored during the Brexit debate, when after the referendum took place, there were some philosophers who said essentially what you were saying, that people have elected you to make your own decisions because they acknowledge that you are better equipped to make decisions for them than they are for themselves. So you can vote against Brexit in Parliament even if a referendum has taken place. And then there are parliamentarians who pushed back and said, no, we are only here to represent the wishes of our constituents. Okay? This is an unresolved tension in democratic theory. Okay? Because in representative democracy, representatives are both supposed to make decisions for you, but also to reflect your views. And when they're in tension, there is no clear formula for which side should win out. But going on to the second question, which is that even if you do elect your government to make decisions for you, let's assume that the representative democracy means that once you elect somebody, he can make decisions for you, even if you don't agree with the individual decision or particular decision being made. He can do that only insofar as it does not trample over one of your fundamental rights. Okay, there is this argument that he doesn't trample. So he can make a decision about, I don't know, whether you should pay 40% tax or 42.5% tax, right? Or whether the warning on the cigarette box should be on top of the box or behind the box. So you can make decisions like that. But he cannot tell you to sit at home and not go to work. Or he cannot take decisions that are going to make you, going to force your employer to lay you off. So in the land of the free and the home of the brave, the US, why are individual citizens not allowed to make decisions for themselves? How can the government possibly tell them to sit at home? So it's an interesting question, right? What are the higher values that the government is trying to protect that allow it to coerce citizens to sit at home? Now, the debate in the US is taking place along these lines because it has a certain tradition of a rhetoric around freedom, right? A certain tradition of expressing ideas about freedom. But in Pakistan, a very similar debate is actually taking place. It's just framed in different terms or couched in different terms, okay? So can someone tell me, how is this debate taking place in Pakistan? Maybe Abdullah bin Zulfikar. There's a Abdullah? Yeah.
I
can't hear you.
I just had to get some water. So
no, that's fine. That's fine. In fact, sorry, I haven't called on some people. I think Muhammad bin Munir I haven't called on, or have I?
I just think that in Pakistan, the lower class is suffering. So at the end, the debate goes on that is it right for the government to close these businesses and make the lower class suffer for themselves? Because at the end of the day, these people don't have the resources because they are daily wages and they're hand-to-mouth people. So it is problematic for them mostly. So I guess this is the debate going on over here.
Okay. But isn't there something else, by the way? Like, there's also like a question of how far can the state coerce its citizens? I mean, there has been a lot of talk about framing in a different way, which is कि हम अवाम को घर नहीं बिठा सकते हैं, हम उनको मना नहीं कर सकते हैं, हम उनको रोक नहीं सकते हैं. When you're talking about, let's look at the masjid debate, the debate about going to mosques.
Yeah, but in that case, isn't it the responsibility of the government to protect its people from the pandemic? Isn't it the responsibility of the government to protect the people from the virus, or rather, should they just let these people go out and spread the virus?
So here's my question, right? If people do not want to protect themselves from the virus, why is the government protecting them from the virus?
But there is always a certain amount of a certain group of people which actually don't want. Is there the overall whole population of Pakistan which does not want to go out, or is it only a certain aspect which is saying that open the mosque, open the shopping mall?
Okay, so that's a very good point, because let's say that the virus was not, the only way that you could get the virus is to go to the mosque. But once you get home, you can't spread it to anybody else. Let's do this thought experiment. A lot of debating is about thought experiments. That if you go to the mosque, you have a chance of getting the virus. But once you get home, there's no way you can spread it to anyone else. The virus exists, so the transmission of the virus takes place solely and wholly in the mosque. It doesn't take place anywhere else. Okay? Would the government have a right to stop people from going into the mosque and exposing themselves to the risk of getting the virus?
Yeah, I think because again, on that case, the people which will be going to the mosque will actually be in contact with the virus and risking their lives at the end.
Okay, right. So, but as long as they're risking their life, but not their wife's life, right? Is that okay? This is also like, this is also, and this is very similar to questions about should the government be allowed to ban drugs, right? Or cigarettes or alcohol or any of these things. Okay? A big part of the reason why governments have the kind of like are able to argue to make for bans on things like cigarettes is because of their secondhand effects. Okay? So if you have a secondhand effect of going to a mosque, perhaps then the government has a right to step in because other people are not consenting to the risk that you are taking, that you're exposing them to. Is that okay? So that's another very important idea that is a big part of debating, but also a big part of public policy making as to whose consent has been obtained, okay, when you're making policy. And at what point do you have to, at what point is consent the primary determinant of whether or not policy, you have the right to make certain policies or not? Okay? So let's look at other issues of consent in governance. Okay? Where is it not required for the government to take somebody's individual consent in making public policy? Or just examples that you can think of. Yeah.
Issues related to national security. Government doesn't necessarily need to take consent of each and every individual in order to make a decision.
Okay, sure. Okay. Can you give me an example?
Of national security.
Mm-hmm.
For example, Pakistan's decision on how to take action against India whenever it needs to.
Okay. Well, the idea basically is, right, again, that the fundamental ideas is that governments, the legitimacy of a government is premised upon the consent of the governed. This is, but what it means by taking the consent of the governed is very complicated. As the earlier example that I was giving you about the question of representative democracy, at what point, in how much detail do you have to consent to policy making? Okay, do you have to consent to the people who are in government, or the people, or the decisions that they reach, or the way in which the decisions are carried out? All of those things at different levels, people will have different answers about how much consent is required or isn't required. But the point at which people generally, or which governments generally try to step in and say that consent is not required is if there is third-party harm involved. So, which is why the masjid question is very interesting. That people want to practice their religion freely and go to the masjid. We all agree that freedom of religion is a fundamental right. Okay? But that seems to be okay as long as they don't hurt anyone else. Unfortunately, when it comes to the question of a contagious virus, them going to the masjid and exercising their inalienable right to freedom of religion means that other people are getting exposed to the virus who actually don't want to be exposed to the virus, and they're being exposed to harm. Right? But it's also another interesting question, I think, right? that when we discuss the issue of how many of you think that mosques should be closed but shopping malls should be open? How many of you think both should be closed? How many of you think both should be open? Okay. Does anyone think both should be open? What's the difference, Reed? I mean, but it's an interesting question, right? Let me try to change this a little bit around. We put together an organization that I'm a part of makes short documentaries. We put together a short documentary on Sabzi Mandi in Karachi. And this was because while the debate was raging countrywide about whether people should be allowed to go to mosques or not allowed to go to mosques, Sabzi Mandi in Karachi was functioning as if there was no such thing as Corona. There were thousands of people congregating there every day, conducting business, and that's how fruit was reaching the rest of the people in the city, and that's how people like you and I were able to bake banana bread. I mean, if you don't have bananas, you can't bake banana bread. If the guy doesn't drive his truck between the Sabzi Mandi and the Thela, you don't get the banana. If the bananas don't get to the Sabzi Mandi and change hands between buyers and sellers, you don't get the banana. If the banana isn't picked in rural Sindh or rural Punjab, you don't get the banana. So this whole supply chain had to be kept open. This was fine, but opening the mosque was not fine. And so this is another very interesting point that debating should teach you. And I just want to be clear that when we're talking about debating, there are two things that we're talking about. This is, I think, important. Because debating is a game which all of us have played. Myself, Atiya, Raza, many of your seniors and yourselves, which is to win the debate. But actually, really what debating is supposed to try and teach you, or supposed to teach you, is a way of looking at the world with a critical lens and trying to analyze things dispassionately. It's not that the debating is a game is just to sharpen your skills. That isn't the end objective in life. The end objective is really to inculcate those skills and then apply them throughout your life. Now, why do you think we never talked about Sabzi Mandi? Or the fact that the wheat harvest was done, again, while Corona was taking place, nobody talked about that. Or any of the other supply chains that get things all the way to your homes, while many of us have been in lockdown. Why have we not discussed that? So one thing we need to also be aware of is that information is produced just like any other manufactured good. Okay? And when you are, and I think this is something that when I debated a very long time ago, when we were growing up, we were not that aware of we were not that aware of like how we were not that aware of how information is actually manufactured, how information reaches us. Just like maybe we don't think about how the banana gets to us and all the hands that are there along the way. We don't really think about how news gets to us either. And this kind of goes back to the question that I raised earliest, which was about reliability of information. Because there are two things. One is that there can be real deep uncertainty about certain facts of the world, because there may be no scientific consensus about something, or there may be deep disagreements about outcomes of different policies, and so on, right? The other thing is that when you're taking a decision, you also need to be aware of the fact that the information that is coming to you on which you take the decision has gone through a process of manufacture, right? Somebody has spoken to somebody has spoken to a source firsthand, has decided what questions to ask. Once he's gotten the answers to the questions, he decides which answers to place in his article. He decides where to print the article in his newspaper, okay? And once that article is printed, all the other newspapers and all the other news organizations make decisions about how to represent that news or recreate that news for their audiences. Okay? And news is also a profit-making industry, just like any other industry. And they will also sell you what you are willing to buy, or they will create what they can sell. So even when you're dealing with information, and this is something that, like I was trying to say earlier, we were not aware of when we were growing up. We didn't really understand how power influenced these things. But you should also be aware as a debater that even the sources of information that you have may not be that certain. Just because you read it on the BBC or on PT, or you watch it on PTV, or you read it in The Economist or The Guardian or whatever, you have to also understand what are the processes that go behind creating that information that is being presented to you, that you are then presenting onwards as fact. Okay, so just to sum up,
I had to ask. I think since you're more informed, I'm sure about this. So when you have a fact like this, when you talk about that based on facts you sort of make a policy, but the facts are so ambiguous when it comes to corona, right? So for example, yesterday in China, Shulan is the other city that has gone through complete lockdown, very similar to Wuhan. And it's been a while since we saw Wuhan, and now we have seen Shulan, and is seeing how bad the lockdown here in Pakistan is. Why isn't the pandemic or outbreak similar to what's happening in China or what has happened in different countries? Is it true that maybe the strain of the virus is different, or are they just not reporting the incidents in a to its right amount?
I think that so I'll tell you what. One thing I would suggest, this is a specific question, Raza. This is actually, so there are these guys who there's this institute called YRISE affiliated with Yale. Their study has been widely cited by people in the developing world and by policymakers who are not in favor of strict lockdowns. Okay, and that study is I'll send you the link, but basically it's called so something like social distancing in low-income countries. What they argue, they don't make any arguments on the basis of like the science of the virus. They only have one primary argument, which is that you are 60 times more likely to get the virus at the age of, I think they picked the age 70 versus the age 20. Okay. And they said that the higher death rate, they said that low-income countries have much younger populations and high-income countries have much older populations. And if you just calculate on the basis of the average age of the population and no other factor, not taking into account possibility of different strains or different immunities or anything like that, it's much more dangerous for rich countries than it is for poor countries. Okay, I think that's possibly correct, but I think that this is actually what you pointed out is a really fundamental question, right? That like you're making policy in a time of great uncertainty, and it also raises the question of who has the authority to make policy, right? In a way that is different, because people say hand over decision making to scientific experts. But even within the scientific community, there are a lot of disagreements. And within the scientific community, there are different types of scientists or different types of scientific practitioners who have different opinions about who should have power. So there's a friend of mine who is a public health professional, a very senior public health professional. And she says that people who think that doctors should be taking decisions about public policy regarding coronavirus are grossly misinformed about what kind of decisions doctors are qualified to make. I'm sure doctors would disagree with her, right? So it is what's fascinating.
Since we're live, it's also very funny. I can't take the name of the country. I don't want to be prosecuted, but like a judicial house of a country said that we're focusing too much on one disease. There are people dying. I'm sure you've read the judgment as well, where people are dying because of heart diseases and pollen issues and everything. We're just focusing on one disease, and that's problematic. we should equally give names to all diseases and open things up. So yeah,
no, but
really
but this is interesting. So their phrasing was obviously quite ridiculous, right? But people, I mean, the International Institute that deals with tuberculosis said that 1.4 million people will die worldwide because of tuberculosis. More than would have died if there was no corona, because people will not seek medical treatment, or because maybe it was because people are going to be cooped up in their homes and they're more likely to get TB. But the point is that if you go to a hospital nowadays, I mean, I don't know if you've been, but I was recently at Jinnah Hospital. I don't want to make it sound like this anecdote is like an all-powerful anecdote. It was very empty. And we were speaking to people there, and they were like, a lot of people are not coming to the hospital because they're afraid of what's going to happen with corona. And so people are having heart attacks at home and dying of heart attacks at home. So I think it's a very complex issue. It's not, that isn't to say the government has handled it well. They've handled it terribly. But I think that there are a discussion of trade-offs is important. It's just that the way in which
very much, sorry to cut you, Sufyan, but there's very much a global debate on exactly this issue. Doctors in the NHS raised it. They said that if you look at the statistics of a variety of other diseases, they're as appalling, if not worse, and equally sort of, the vectors are equally easily transmissible. So what is it about corona that's getting so much attention? That's a separate debate altogether.
This actually, Atiya, I think that one thing that one should leave, like, again, not to try to introduce skepticism about the dangers around the virus, but the truth is, right, is that the way in which, so I'll put it this way. I was at a media workshop in Singapore in December, and the workshop involved a simulation exercise in which measles had been transmitted from, I think, Samoa to Singapore. And if you remember, there was a measles outbreak. I think it was in Samoa, but it was in some Polynesian islands. Measles is more virulent, more contagious than corona, and more deadly also. And what the exercise was meant to do was meant to check journalists and teach them how to act responsibly in times of a crisis. Now, the interesting thing was that even though all of us were there, because we were being trained to be responsible journalists, a lot of people got really carried away even in a simulation. And they were like, but the other paper is going to report it. But the other news station is going to report it, right? So they kept coming out with more and more fantastical stories because they were afraid that other people would get the news out first, or other people would have the more catchy headline. So, like I was saying, as we should be skeptical about textile industry, sugar industry, real estate industry, all of these industries, we should also be skeptical about the media industry as well. So, and the only way and because ultimately you have to consume something, right? You have to learn from somewhere. The only way to do that is to read very widely and have a sense of history. And that will hopefully give you a better, more well-rounded perspective on things than if you only pick one news source. Or if you only pick the news source that agrees with you. To try to read the stuff that challenges you, that you don't agree with. Okay, and just to wrap up very quickly, the thing that you guys should take into consideration is that public policy debates are, the constituents of those debates are really questions of rights and questions of consequences. Okay, and how you balance those questions of rights and consequences and how they compete against each other. Okay, and so next time if we have another session, we can explain in more detail how that's to be applied to parliamentary debate in particular. Okay, the other stuff is very important as background so that you understand that information is also produced and manufactured. A healthy degree of skepticism is important, and the way to know more is to read more. All right.
Sufyan, there's a question in the chat. What do you mean by a check on history, sir?
I said a sense of history, because what you'll find is that things repeat themselves much more than you would imagine. So you will find that the kind of mistakes that governments make in 2020 are actually quite similar to what they made in 1980 and very similar to what they made in 1960. Okay? And people call this like the tragedy of the human condition or the tragedy of history. But human beings are human beings, and they're more or less the same throughout history in many ways. The mistakes that they make are similar. Okay? It's like if you were Hitler and you knew that Napoleon had lost his army by invading Russia, you may not have done that. Okay? Or if you were Hitler and your entire point was to do what Napoleon had not done, then you may have obviously learned the wrong lesson from it. But nevertheless, at least you would have been aware that this happened, right? This is like the most obvious thing. But there are many, many mistakes that we make. I mean, you know, we talk about how the Pakistani government keeps supporting militant groups or political proxies again and again and again. And the same result takes place every single time. The proxy turns against them, or the proxy is no longer controllable. So with a better sense of history, you will learn that if you're going to make mistakes, at least make new ones. But unfortunately, people tend to make the same mistakes again and again. For instance, Atiya has known me for at least 20 years, and she knew I was going to be 10 minutes late to this session. So if you have a sense of history about me, you would know that I'm likely to be 10 minutes late.
Yeah, we were talking about cycles and repeating mistakes this morning as well.
Yeah.
So that's why I found it ironic. So
Yeah,
I'm sure
absolutely.
others have a lot of questions.
Mhm.
I'm sure you're in a hurry, Sufyan.
No, I've got about 15 minutes actually. If you guys have got some questions, we can go over them.
Yeah. So I'm sure there's some questions. So we'll either hear them live, or we can or you can type them out in the chat.
Anyone have any questions? I may just answer by saying we'll deal with it next time, but do ask them if you have any questions. I'm also aware that some of you may not have been able to hear what I was saying very clearly.
No, your mic was very clear.
Okay, great.
But so very happy to hear that, Sufyan, you've sort of agreed to a next time. I think the students will be equally pleased to hear that. We're sort of very grateful that you made time, and you know, I thought that this was a fascinating session. It's perhaps the most entertaining conversation I've had on COVID-19 since the crisis started. So I found it very enjoyable. And I hope I speak for everybody here.
So as a coach, I've just sorry, ma'am, you can sort of continue. I thought you were done. So sorry.
Yes, please carry on. Please carry on.
I just had a question. I think this is something that students want to sort of get assurance about. You have coached the Pakistan team several times, and you've done a great job with your students. And this is also something I tell all of my students, that 99% of the people who've been on the Pak team have also done exceptionally well academically. How do you sort of advise them to sort of balance things and yet do exceptionally well in debates and academics? Like, what's your advice to these kids? Because, you know, most of them actually just at some point decide to leave debates. Oh, exams are 6 months from now, so I got to stop debates and I have to focus on academics. What's your advice to students on this? You know, on how to sort of balance things out?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Actually, this is an issue which is highly contested. So when Atiya and I were speaking on the circuit, there were very few debates. There were even fewer in Karachi, but there were few in Lahore. And if you ask me, there are too many tournaments in Lahore. And if I'm not trying to say there should only be 2 tournaments in the entire year, but I think that you need to realize that you don't have to be at a tournament every weekend in order to be a good debater. It may actually make you a worse debater. You don't need to have 6-hour sessions every day for months and months and months on end. None of that is necessary. You should definitely attend a couple of tournaments a season. and you should definitely work hard at camp and put in the hours when necessary. But it should not become this all-consuming one and only thing that you do, because there are other things that you have to do as well in order for you to get into a good university, but also just to live a healthy, balanced life as a high schooler. You know, I mean, it's not, life is not all about getting to the next stage. It's also about, you know, conducting yourself in a happy and healthy way where you are.
Yeah.
So that's Sufyan going into the life coaching territory now. Very enlightened stuff coming from him.
Yeah. I have actually one more question.
I'm highly unqualified to be a life coach, but this is my
this is my
contribution.
One more for the life coach. Sufyan, the last question. I think this is like the tougher life coach question.
So sorry, Raza, I just have something to add to that. I just want to add to that answer there, that actually if you do it the way Sufyan just said it, it will actually improve and add to your academic performance. And there are no two ways about it. I don't say that with even a shred of doubt. That debates very much improves your academic performance. It improves your ability to think quickly, think analytically, articulate yourself in an exam situation better, and have a grasp on most conversations, academic or otherwise. So you will find after you've debated for a few months that your academics have actually improved. So this shouldn't even be a debate in my case, but yes, I agree with Sufyan 100% that when we were there, it was far more rational, the debating calendar, than it is now.
Yeah, but I'm not discouraging any of you. You guys should all learn about, or let's put it this way: you all should learn how to debate. You should all learn the skills of debate. You should learn the subject matter of debate. Many of you will probably find that you also want to compete at and participate in the debating game, as it were, and that will also add value to your academic careers and your life and your exposure to different points of view and so on. So there's not discouragement at all, but at the same time, I'm saying that if you find yourself in a situation where you feel that you must attend the 6th tournament in 6 weeks, to say, look, this doesn't work for me, and this is not going to help me be a better debater. A moderate amount of debating and a lot of reading will help you become a better debater and also help your academics.
Please emphasize on that, a lot of reading.
Yeah, a lot of reading.
Yeah, just one last question, Sufyan. Just one last question. So when we have a camp, a lot of times that happens, you know, sometimes you see students who on their first day are, you know, they have the talent, and the others just feel intimidated. It happens a lot of times when you have a new bunch coming in. What do you feel is the importance of hard work? And, you know, hard work versus...
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Yeah.
We just lost you.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, so, you know...
Sorry, Raza, actually, you're kind of breaking up.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, Raza, so we lost you in the middle. We lost the question.
Okay. Am I audible now? I'll repeat the question.
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, so it happens a lot of times that, you know, when I have a session with a new bunch of, you know, kids coming in.
We've lost you again.
No, we've lost you. Can you type it out, Raza?
Yeah, I will. Just hold on.
Yeah, and in the meantime, somebody had raised their hand. I think it was Muhammad bin Munir or Muhammad Hashir.
Raza, you're breaking up. Could you just type the question?
Yeah, I am typing actually. Just hold on.
Okay, great.
And somebody had a question, Muhammad bin Munir or Muhammad Hashir or somebody.
Yeah, I had a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically it was that it was about the second speaker role. So what happens is that when you, during your negative case, make issues. So for me, when I make issues, the issues are on point. But while speaking out on those issues, I like sort of mess up everything in my mind because it just, you know, I cannot prioritize things. And at the end, the things that should come first come at the end and it's all just messed up. So I don't actually know how to deal with that.
Okay, that's a very specific question, and that's difficult to answer in the absence of actually watching a speech. You don't. The thing is that where you place your issues in your or your refutations. In this case, as a second, you're talking about a second op speaker or a second prop speaker, second op speaker, right? As a second op speaker, where you're writing out your refutations. First of all, the way you write it out on your paper should be in the order that you're going to speak it, right? The order in which you're going to say it. So you shouldn't have 1, 2, 3, 4, but actually go up and say 4, 2, 3, 1, right? That doesn't make any sense. So you need to write it out in the order that you're going to say it. But what you say first, second, third, and fourth will vary very much from debate to debate, right? So there's certain issues that are fundamental that you need to say right at the beginning. But there are certain issues, other things that may be very impactful that you have to say at the end, because from there, your positive case will flow naturally.
Yeah.
Right? Okay? And you have your sequence right when you're actually able to say more in less time. Because when your sequence is correct, you don't have to back up and re-explain everything.
Yeah.
Each point naturally follows from the point before it. Okay? But like, again, definitional challenges वैसे इतने होने भी नहीं चाहिए, but when we were taught how to debate, we would say that right at the beginning of every speech, if you have a definitional challenge, raise that definitional challenge, right? So there's certain things that are supposed to come right at the beginning. Okay? And if you really think that their entire case is based on 1 or 2 fundamental points, then those should come first. But it's difficult to go into more detail without actually referring to a specific speech. And maybe if we have more sessions like this, we can talk more about the particulars of debating.
So then I shared my question with you on the chat.
Okay, just a second. Yeah, okay. Hard work versus talent. Raza's question is, what is the importance of hard work? You might be a weak speaker, but why should you continue to work hard? I think, first of all, being interested in debate and debating doesn't mean that you're going to be, that you're not, you don't have to be a naturally talented public speaker to be interested in or want to pursue debating. Okay? It might be, you might want to pursue debating because you find it intellectually exciting. You might not have what many of us would consider to be a great voice, right? Or a natural dramatic flair. Okay? So first of all, so I guess there are several ways of trying to address this question, but the first point is that if you feel unsure of yourself because you don't have what people consider to be great style, that should not discourage you from taking part in debate. Debating as a competitive activity. Because over a period of time, you can actually speak quite competently and legibly. I know legibly is something you say about handwriting, but I use that word for speaking also. Even if you're not a fantastic charismatic speaker. For instance, Nelson Mandela was not a fantastic charismatic speaker, but he spoke very effectively, and because of the force of his personality and the strength of the arguments that he was making, he did project a certain charisma. But he never spoke like Obama did. If you actually go back and hear his speeches, he never spoke like Obama did. And I mean, again, if you're again talking about style, I mean, Winston Churchill grew up with a stutter and spoke with a lisp, right? So those are not things that should bother you that much. I personally, I mean, just giving my example, I don't think that I have a great public speaking style, or a great voice, but there are a lot of successful debaters who don't, and that's fine. The second thing is, the second way I think of answering this question is that hard work is actually something that coaches will often value more than talent. And if you are left with the choice between a very talented speaker who does not work hard and a person who is not quite as talented but works very, very hard, many coaches will choose the second. Many coaches will choose the second. Coaches will choose people who are coachable. Okay? Even the best coaches. It doesn't mean that the very best coach in the world is going to pick the 5 most talented people. The 5 most talented people may create a complete mess. It's a team sport. It's not just an individual talent competition. Okay? And then the last thing is that just because you're not a good speaker or you're not doing very well competitively doesn't mean that you should not be interested in the analytical tools or intellectual rigor that debating gives you. Okay? I'll give you an example. There was a kid on the 2017 Pak team. I think he was on 2017. No, he's on 2018, I'm sorry. And he didn't speak a single round.
I think they were two, not one.
What?
They were 2 speakers.
In 2018, there was one. In 2018, there was one. It's Umar Zaib. Extremely smart kid. Extremely smart kid. He understood debating analytically much better than the other 4.
Yeah.
Very smart kid. And, you know, he's been working for me at this media startup on and off for the last year and a half. And he does fantastic work. He does work that is better than the 30-year-olds who work for me.
Yeah.
And that's all on the basis of the analytical skills he picked up from debating. And he was good enough in terms of his analytical skills that he got onto the national team and actually added a lot of value even though he didn't speak. But you know, even if you don't end up on the national team, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't work hard at debating, because it will definitely benefit you in many other ways. And you know, I think one of the things we're all trying to say in our different ways is that tournaments are not the be all and the end all. There's lots more that you can get out of this activity. Okay, and I think this will probably be the last question. Sir, when you are new to debating, you kind of hesitate in front of people. What would you suggest people on this when they mess up their speech because of them being hesitant? So all of us have different kinds of anxiety, some in front of large crowds and some in front of individuals, and this is very normal. The solution really is, in most cases, to be prepared and to practice, even if this sounds very cliche, but this is really the truth. You know, again, I'm sorry to give Winston Churchill example. I know he's not very, it's not a very woke example to give in many ways. He was an imperialist and a white supremacist after all. But he used to actually rectify literally all of his speeches, even if they were 40 pages long. Plus, he used to keep the notes right in front of him. And he was considered to be the greatest public speaker of the 20th century. So if he can do it, so should you. So just prepare properly, okay? And you will feel less stressed out, but also recognize that other people are also very anxious as well. And you know, it's a very difficult thing to say that you have to debate as if your life depends on it, but at the end of the day, it's still a game. That's a very strange kind of like fine balance to strike. But that's really the balance that all kind of like competitive, I'm going to use the word athletes, strike at some point, in which it's both just a game, so they can wake up and play it again the next day, and also they play it like their life depends on it. So that's the kind of attitude you need to inculcate. But yeah, preparation, practice, these are the things that are really important. And the knowledge that everybody feels hesitant. Anything else?
I think that's.
No, we appreciate that you have to rush now, Sufyan. Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah.
Raza,
Thank you so much.
Wrap up.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sufyan. I really hope we have more of these sessions. I think that
Inshallah.
It feels really happy to have somebody like you. I've never been coached by Sufyan, so I also am really enjoying this, because this is the first time I'm sitting in a session I've never been allowed to sit in the park camps when Sofyan was coaching. So he would have allowed, but I never asked.
On day one, everyone thinks it's great. By day 10, they're like, we want this guy to get out of here.
Yeah, I know.
So,
I know for a fact. But you know, it's for their
that is definitely what it is.
It's for their good.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone. Okay, and so inshallah we'll have another session after Eid sometime. Okay, so stay safe. Okay, and wash your hands. Okay, goodbye.
All right, bye-bye.
Thanks, Sufyan.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, Athiya.
Bye. Guys, I hope so you guys had a great time. You guys are not supposed to be, just a few small things. I'm really happy that you guys got you should be very thankful, and you should feel lucky that you got a session from Sufyan. He is not an easy man to get your hands on. He is by far, I think, he's by far the most experienced person in debating with regards to debating in Pakistan. So some really important things that you sort of have to take, all right? Like, as you said, the first session is always going to be fun, but it's not the same by the by the 10th session. We know a few students have backed out for the same reason, that they feel it's boring or the reading is too much, there's too much pressure. It's only done like this to make you better, individuals, to make or to carve out the real intellectuals that is inside you. And we really feel, that that's something we have to sort of work on. He's somebody who I really hope so. You all will sort of bump into sometime in future when you're going to park camps. So yeah, I hope you guys got some good learning. I don't know why you guys, some of you were just slightly intimidated by him. The things that you have heard, oh, he's a strict coach. No, he's not. He's a real fun guy. Talk more next time, ask more questions, and just don't hesitate. Ask questions. You don't get these opportunities, so in life, you don't get them. So if you have somebody like him, and if I'm telling you that he's like a debating god, just ask questions. It's like your prayer time, and you should be praying as much as you can next to your God. Not being blasphemous, just being slightly funny. But yeah, that's all. Ms. Satya, do you have to say something before we finish, before we end?
No, Raza, absolutely. So I think that I was really excited that they had this opportunity as well. So guys, just to give you a little bit of context, my debating career was finishing when Sufyan arrived with the KG. So the KGS team arrived in Lahore for their first nationals ever, for the first time that KGS ever took part in any nationals. They arrived in Lahore. I had already been on the Pakistan team the previous year, so I considered myself as, and I was the only one left who was still debating, because everybody else, all my colleagues in the Pakistan team had sort of graduated and gone on to college by then. So I thought that I was the number one top debater in the circuit. The circuit was very small in those days. I thought that, the nationals are going to be a cinch. I'm going to float through them and I'm going to win. And interestingly, when we got to the final, when my team got to the final, we were up against KGS, which was a shocker because that was their first time debating. They didn't have a coach. This was their first parliamentary debating experience ever. And of course, Sufyan was this tiny, a sort of skinny, very sort of excited.
He looked like Harry Potter, to be very honest. I've seen his pictures.
Yeah, exactly. So he was this, but I tell you, they beat me. They beat my team unanimously that day, and all three of the KGS speakers made it to the Pakistan team. Yeah. So that just shows you that experience in debates means nothing. And look at where he is now. So I think that I wasn't expecting him to even offer to come again, but it's fantastic that he's offered. So I look forward to whenever we have the next session with him. But I'll just reiterate that my academic, and I can speak for Sufyan as well, I think, that his academic career, you can see his education and career history. Raza, every debater, academically, they just soar once they become debaters. So it's a complete myth that debating will interfere with your academic performance. It will only improve and enhance it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's it. That's it from me, Raza. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for letting us sort of take over.
No, thank you for giving us the opportunity.
Inshallah,
I think all thanks to you.
yeah.
And also Ms. Hira and
And
everybody here who sort of helped us, who have helped us with this this whole setup. I mean, thank you very much. They've been quiet.
Yeah.
I know they've been holding their phones next to like an Instagram page, but like it's a great effort nonetheless. But yeah, thanks to all of them. Thanks to all.
Yeah. No, it was very, and let me tell you something else on another front to give you sort of congratulation and kudos, that it's being said around the debating circuit all over Pakistan that the city school has taken over the virtual public speaking platform, because now we've hosted online debates, we've hosted declamation contest, we've hosted MUN, you've carried on. So literally we're miles ahead of other schools on this front. So well done to
I know.
and all the debaters and all the coaches. Mashallah. Yeah. Okay, thank you everybody.
You guys should wave when somebody says thank you and bye. Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. All right. Bye-bye. Bye everybody. I see you guys tomorrow in class. That's when we have our class. So it's great that Sofyan, I had no idea that Sofyan was going to talk about public policy in particular. But I'm glad that we read a little bit about this on Thursday. So I think we'll have our class tomorrow. So consider that today was like a holiday. We did not have a class. I think you just got like a good enlightenment session. So I'll see you guys some tomorrow. So yeah, 8:30 p.m. tomorrow. See you guys outside. We'll share the link with you. Yeah, that's all. Stay safe and remember to wash your hands. Bye.
That was good.
Bye-bye.